Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to an exciting panel discussion on the first decade of Vision Zero. Since being first introduced in the US, the Swedish-born traffic safety philosophy has shifted and grown for an American audience. Today, we'll have a retrospective discussion on Vision Zero's victories, failures, missteps, and miracles, and answers to the question, where and should Vision Zero be 10 years from now? I'm joined by an exciting group of panelists today who will each speak individually, followed by a discussion and questions and answer section. So please use the chat box throughout the presentations to submit your questions, and we'll have staff who forward them to me so that they don't get lost. First, we have Amy Cohen, who helped found Families for Safe Streets after her 12-year-old son, Sammy, was killed in 2013. FSS confronts traffic violence by advocating for life-saving changes and providing support to those personally affected by crashes in our communities, and has been instrumental to New York's success in passing many Vision Zero policies. We're also joined by Lorraine Martin, who is the president and CEO of the National Safety Council, America's leading nonprofit safety advocate with a century-long legacy of eliminating preventable deaths and injuries. She's also the chair of the Road to Zero Coalition, the nation's largest traffic safety coalition. After Lorraine, we'll hear from Kyle Whitehead, who is the managing director of public affairs for the Active Transportation Alliance. Active Trans advocates for walking, biking, and public transit to create healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities in Chicagoland. And we'll finish with Julia Kite-Laidlaw, who is the Director of Safety Policy at the New York City Department of Transportation. Her portfolio is the Vision Zero program, New York City's internationally recognized initiative to eliminate serious injuries and deaths in traffic crashes. So with that said, Amy, take it away.
Thanks, Philip. And I'm just going to start by sharing my screen. Thanks, I'm honored to be here today. I am going to reflect on nearly a decade of Vision Zero in the US, share more about Families for Safe Streets and our new efforts pushing the US to adopt Vision Zero, and share some lessons learned. Many of you have heard me share stories about my son. So today I'm going to just keep it brief and say that this past Friday marked 8 years since I lost my son, and it's a heartache no parent should ever have to endure. Sadly, it is something that is all too common. So all of us in Families for Safe Streets, like me, have lost a family member or suffered a serious injury, a life-altering injury. We came together in 2014, and now we have chapters across the United States. Having trouble with moving ahead. There we go. And here you can see a map of the chapters that we have. It really is a growing national movement. A lot of people ask, why is Families for Safe Streets successful? What's the miracle sauce? And we really consider it to be three things. First, we partner with an existing street safety organization here in New York City. Our partnership is with Transportation Alternatives. And we do that because we're the involuntary volunteer army. We didn't sign up for this, and TA brings the expertise, the connections, the legislative know-how. We also came together as collective voice, not sort of one person fighting individually, but that way we show the power of this movement and how much give a face really to the crisis and how it is affecting every community. And also it means that when people are having a hard time, they have an opportunity to step back. And the third key ingredient to our success is that we're not afraid to push back. We use grassroots advocacy strategies to harness the political will with rallies, vigils, and civil disobedience when necessary. So here, you can see the power of our collective voices pushing back on the complacency as part of our call for the Biden administration to commit to zero traffic deaths.
As we grow up, we learn about math in class. We are taught addition and subtraction, what increases and what can be taken away with a simple symbol change. Today, the symbol changes by the second. Every 24 seconds, the world rediscovers what aftermath means, what minus means. Minus father, minus daughter returning from a meal, minus mother, minus cousins behind his first automobile. We are made to discover too early the mathematics of loss. And every day the lessons find their way into old photos and keepsakes, into a typical Sunday morning sitting on the lips of a farewell prayer or a birthday celebration with an empty seat that now fills the room. This new minus, as simple as loss, as death, is as simple as breath, but we will never change your name to the deceased. You will always live in our hearts as temples we will use to pull dreams from when the darkness kisses us into slumber. We will remember you as mortar to martyrs. Your beauty will remain air circling our lungs and giving us life to move forward, even as we fear what this same movement has already taken away. They may have been robbed from the earth, but it is the earth that will love them back onto our tongues, in our poems, prayers, and song. And your names, never forgotten, will forever live on.
The scale of traffic violence is mind-boggling and all too often not recognized. I'm not sure if my screen is sharing. Are you seeing anything? I'm going to it didn't move on to the next screen. So let me do that again. Give me one sec. Sorry for the technical difficulty. I'm not sure what's happening. Okay, I'm resharing. Sorry about that. There we go. Sorry about that. So you're likely hearing these numbers a lot during this conference. I'm not going to list them all. You got to see the numbers as faces in the last video, but we have a public health crisis that is not widely recognized, and it's been going on year after year for decades. Many communities across the country are trying to tackle this crisis. More than 40 communities in the US have adopted Vision Zero. But Vision Zero has come to mean many things to different people. So I want to spend a few minutes just reviewing what a Vision Zero approach really is and how it's different from the traditional approach. Many people associate Vision Zero with the traditional E's. But in fact, the E's in engineering, education, enforcement, those all started in the 1950s. That's not what's new. Implementing Vision Zero requires that we shift from those traditional E's, which have really resulted in an over-reliance on enforcement, to focusing on the top of the pyramid and focusing on safe streets, safe speeds, safe vehicles to keep us safe. And while we have started on the path to Vision Zero, I think this slide is really illustrative. Most cities are still using a traditional individual driver-oriented behavior approach. Even those who have adopted Vision Zero, including us here in New York City, have not really achieved the transformative change envisioned in the Vision Zero model. We really need to have a focus on getting people out of their cars, redesigning roads to manage speeds, and creating designated street usage to reduce conflict between users. Getting to the right-hand corner of the previous slide will require that we make dramatic changes. We have to recognize that traffic deaths are preventable, put in place bold, systematic, top-of-the-pyramid solutions that plan for human failings, and recognize that saving lives is not expensive. And putting in place bold, systematic changes, it's not that hard. We recently did a presentation sharing an analysis of existing research and data that shows we have the tools and the know-how right now to get 3/4 of the way to zero. We don't have to wait for something new to be designed. We are nearly there already. New technologies are expected to move us the rest of the way. You can watch the national briefing where we go through this analysis on the Vision Zero Network website. So cities across Europe are taking bold, dramatic change, transforming their streetscapes, much of which happened during COVID. Paris rolled out 650 kilometers of emergency bike lanes for the use of key workers and others during the lockdown, and committed to 650 kilometers of additional cycleways. Boris Johnson in England committed to creating thousands of miles of curb-protected cycleways built to newly established high standards, costing £2 billion. In Milan, they committed to 22 miles of transformed street. Rome, 93 miles. And in New York, we have some open streets, but it's a far cry from what others are doing, what is possible, and it's a real far cry from what is needed. We will never eliminate traffic deaths on our roadways with the piecemeal approach we've been taking, one community here, one street there, one solution over there. That's why Families for Safe Streets joined with the Vision Zero Network, the Road to Zero Coalition, the National Safety Council, and hundreds of other organizations to call on the Biden administration to commit to zero traffic deaths and adopt Vision Zero and a safe systems approach. Senator Blumenthal and Congresswoman Miatkowski introduced a bicameral zero traffic deaths resolution in July. We've been meeting with senators and Congress members from across the country, and we now have 40 elected officials with bipartisan support signed on as co-sponsors to this bill. Our goal is to double that number and get even more Republicans signed on by next month as we mark World Day of Remembrance. I hope you will help us. This is a key solution. We need a federal commitment to Vision Zero and safe systems. I want to also just spend a few minutes talking about enforcement. Using the 3 E's approach, as I said, really has resulted in an over-reliance on enforcement. Too many municipalities and states have used the language of Vision Zero, but really all they've done is ramp up police efforts by armed police officers. This is not what Vision Zero is all about. Our efforts have really focused on automated enforcement to the extent that enforcement is a part of the solution, because automated enforcement doesn't discriminate, it doesn't escalate, it is equitable and fair. Julia on the panel will be talking a lot about New York City's automated enforcement program. So I really just wanted to briefly today touch on some best practices that we've discovered here in New York and from places across the country. So first, earmarking. A good program really should earmark revenue and reinvest it by redesigning streets. So like if you have money from speeding tickets, like a certain percentage should be reinvested into physical traffic calming treatments, particularly reinvesting in the neighborhoods, most having the highest rates of death. We also encourage people to earmark some of the revenue to crash victims and crash victim services. Fines, secondly, they really should be a maximum of $50. There's no reason really why we have to, have such a high fine structure. It's really meant to be a slap on the wrist to remind people to change their behavior. We also encourage a good program to have alternative payment options, whether it be a driving safety course or something else for low-income drivers to meet the fine. Because we really do not want a failure to pay to result in some kind of extra fines or punishment. All the fines should be rolled out ideally with a warning period in advance. On the administration of the program, the camera company should not have an incentive for wanting, get more tickets, because the goal of this is for people to change their behavior. The revenue should go down. So the camera company should not be paid on a commission per ticket basis. You want to make sure that cameras protect privacy. There's no stored facial recognition. All the tickets should have a mandatory review with a video shared with the violator. The DOT should have to issue a report on the race and ethnicity of the vehicle owners to examine for any profiling. And you really want to look at camera placement in a way that it's fair. So you shouldn't have the camera like at the sign where the speed limit went down by 10 or more miles an hour. It should have to be a certain set distance. And you want to really start thinking about what are you going to do with those repeat offenders? What are the people who are getting lots and lots of tickets? You want to put in an escalated program where you're doing a driver safety course and maybe even consider seizing vehicles. I also want to just take a minute and make sure you're aware of the upcoming World Day of Remembrance coming on November 21st. This UN-sponsored event is over 20 years old, and it's an opportunity for you to amplify your advocacy efforts. World Day of Remembrance, the focus is to remember, support, and act. So please consider holding an event in your community. We're going to try to make it as easy as possible. We have an online toolkit where you'll get everything from a share image to customize with your event details, social media messages, press release templates, event planning guidelines, ideas for visuals, and more. You can sign up for your toolkit on the website, www.orfss.org. We're also holding a series of events the week leading up to the event, a faith leader forum, so you can engage your faith community through sermons for safe streets, a virtual candle lighting, some trainings, and more. It's all on our website, so I hope you will join us. And before I close, very briefly, I just want to urge you, connect people who've been personally impacted with us. No one should have to endure this heartache alone. And with COVID, much of our support services now are virtual, so anyone can join across the country, whether we have a chapter there or not. Everything's on our website, familiesforsafestreets.org. So a brief summary before I close. What can you do? Be bold and transformational, focus on a safe systems approach, sign on to our Zero Traffic Deaths campaign, and get members of your members of Congress from your community to co-sponsor. Elevate this work by supporting those who are personally impacted, and hold a vigil for World Day of Remembrance. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy, for that perspective. Next, we'll zoom out a bit and take a more national perspective on this issue. Lorraine, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. And thank you to the Transportation Alternatives and Vision Zero Cities Conference. It's really an honor to be with you today. Philip introduced me as the president and CEO of the National Safety Council and leading the Road to Zero Coalition. I'll bring a little bit of both of those to life for you here. We are a national organization and have been looking at what are the preventable leading causes of both injury and death over the last 100 years. So our goal is to make sure everyone gets to live their fullest life. And unfortunately, one of the places that we've had to in the past and still have to focus is our roadways, because it is one of the leading causes of preventable deaths in our nation. And clearly, we just heard that the call is very important. It's personal. And I'm going to give you some numbers here in just a minute. But we are fully supportive of all of the initiatives to get to zero. And because these are preventable, zero is achievable. We just have to make sure we do all the things that Amy listed and more to go make those happen. So first, I'd just like to look a little bit at the data, because that's one of the things that the National Safety Council does. Sometimes it's hard to look at. I'm going to show you here first that we have some data from the preliminary estimates of roadway fatalities for the first 6 months of 2021. And tragically, 16% year-over-year increase for that period. So that would be between 2020 and 2021. And it was already a significant increase again in 2020 over 2019. And I'll give you a number that is just so hard to hear, but we have negated 15 years of progress on preventing deaths on our roadways as a result of the pandemic and whatever behavior was happening on our roadways. 15 years of going backwards. So not only did we have a challenge before all this, our challenge is even greater. This next chart shows that in that first 6 months of 2021, we estimated that the number of souls no longer with us because of preventable issues on roads is 21,400. That's still a preliminary number, but that is something that we verify over time. It won't deviate much from that, but it is preliminary. That means the death rate climbed to 27%, another 3%. And the number I just want to have us put our eyeballs on here is this 117. And that is the number of people dying every single day. We saw the faces on Amy's charts. That's 117 of those faces of people that are no longer with us every single day. And to put it into more stark contrast, that's 2 more each day than we lost the year before. And that's what's happened to us in the first 6 months. So our call to action is ever more needed. And I'm so glad that you're all here with us today and helping around the states to get some of this work done. We clearly have a lot of work to do. And if I can go to my next chart here, I'm still optimistic though. And sometimes when we have some of this data and some of this information, it just tells us that we've got to double down and really focus on what we know will work. We do have tools. We have the knowledge. Amy just showed you that we can get 3/4 of the way there with the tools already in our pockets, with the community support that we already have around the nation, and the growing voices, not only in our government, but from organizations and advocacy groups that say enough is enough, and we must do something about that. We have seen thousands of supporters now come on to the Zero Traffic Deaths call to action that was given to President Biden and Secretary Buttigieg that Amy mentioned. We're really honored, Amy, to have worked with you on that. She has been tireless. If you want to know who's been the energy and the spark behind all that, it truly was Amy and her team. So thank you for that from Families of Safe Streets. Another way, though, that we've been working, and you can see that here, is on the Road to Zero Coalition. And the coalition is really the nation's largest group of organizations, business, individuals, and advisors from the government that are committed to reducing traffic fatalities and literally having that zero goal by 2050. That sounds crazy, but if you don't start, if you don't have a goal, we're not going to get there. It's really built on 3 key pillars. And that is doubling down on what we know works. And we know what works. Don't speed, don't drive impaired, wear your seatbelt, get technology in cars, make sure we design our streets safely. We know what the things are that we've used in the past. But we also have to add to those with the new technologies to improve safety. And by really thinking about safety as a safety culture and a set of safety systems, not just, as Amy said, enforcement and behavior. It's going to take all of those. And that's really what the Road to Zero Coalition was founded on and what we've been working on. And if you aren't part of the coalition, please let us know, because it's one of the places that I would love to get more folks involved. Amy brought up automated enforcement, and I just want to sit on that here for a moment here. And I know everyone is passionate about this for all the reasons that we've heard. And if it is done equitably, it really can address roadway behaviors like speeding, running red lights, and reduce crashes. NHTSA has said that speeding is contributing to nearly 26% of all traffic fatalities. That's a pretty big number. And if we could bring that down in and of itself, and we know that automated enforcement helps with that. Literally, if you've got a camera up there, the data will show that the number of folks driving over 5 miles an hour more than what is posted dramatically drops. So we're just causing that behavior to be impacted even if no tickets are issued, which is a fantastic behavior change. But it also can really address things like red light running, not just speeding. And tragically, we know that 843 people and 143,000 were injured because of red light running just in 2019 alone. So those two things, which most of the cameras are aimed at, really can help us change behavior and move things without involving, extra manpower and enforcement, just simply by monitoring with eyes in a camera what's going on our streets. We have partnered, and Amy gave a lot of nice, helpful tips of how to do automated enforcement correctly, but we actually partner with several organizations to create a checklist. We like to do that. We like to look at data, and then we like to find best practices and make those sort of white labeled so that anybody can use them. And so we do have an automated enforcement checklist to help communities design and deploy automated enforcement in ways that are fair, equitable, and truly aimed at getting to safer behavior on the roadways, not for economic gains that sometimes the cameras were initially used for. So if you haven't looked at that automated checklist, please let us know. It would be available from NSC, and it really does help you address some issues. And some of those that are really important are things like identifying the right areas to put the camera, making sure it's focused on those areas that have been the most safety or crash related incidents for you, connecting with the community members. So doing this with transparency. We're looking to change behavior, not catch people and fine them. We want to make them safer. So working with your community members is always very key. Educating the public that the cameras are there, putting them in the right places, using data to make sure that it's truly about bringing safer behavior and watching that, because maybe you don't get it right the first time. So that checklist, and I think we just had a assist of somebody putting it in the chat room, really does help you engineer, design the use of this really important behavior changer in a way that is going to get to the results that you're looking for. We're also partnering with all organizations that are looking to create safer streets, and that is how we've organized underneath the Road to Zero Coalition. It's thousands of organizations and individuals who have one thing in common, and that is to say we would like to see zero fatalities on our roadways. Some of those members did help us with the automated enforcement checklist, so thank you for that. But we've always also put out a number of policy positions and statements, really just to demonstrate where we think energy should be placed and how to go about bringing about zero fatalities. And those policy and position statements are things that states and communities and organizations can use to build programs and to know that you're sort of sitting in the place where a lot of best practices have been found. We also have webinars and training programs that you can get either from the National Safety Council and from Road to Zero. Some recently we've been doing around the whole issue of equity in transportation safety. We also have lots of driver safety programs that can be used. So I just offer those to you as things that might be resources that could be helpful. In addition, we've gotten some support from NHTSA to do some grants underneath the Road to Zero, and they're called innovation grants. And they're just opened up a new round for the next 3 years of these grants. And they are finding, again, where a little bit of money can help a jurisdiction, a city, an organization do something that they think has some great impact across multiple applications and multiple communities, and give us a little bit of money, and then make sure that we're making it available to all those that could be benefited from it. So if you're interested in some of that too, let us know. Those grants are just opening up for the next 3 years. We know change doesn't come without leadership and without policies, and that's why we really are so pleased to see that safety has remained in the infrastructure and surface transportation legislation. There's some very important specific things that are safety related as we start to invest in upgrading some of our infrastructure. If you would like to lend your voice to that, keep doing that. Certainly many organizations have helped make sure that those safety related things stay in the infrastructure bill. There are things like safe system approach in there, speed management. Some of the Vision Zero programs are highlighted, data collection, so we really know what's working, reflecting many of the Road to Zero priorities. So thank you for that. I love starting to hear safe system approach talked about in a lot of different areas. Department of Transportation is starting using that. It doesn't mean we all have the same definition of what it is. Amy gave us a little bit of of that background, and it's going to be important that we truly make sure we're designing and acknowledging that people do make mistakes, and the cost of those mistakes should not be death or injury. And we can build systems that help us acknowledge that that happens and ensure that we are building safety into our systems. We also have to make sure that we're addressing impaired driving technology. And there is some things in the infrastructure activities about that, but advanced impaired driving prevention technology is here today. Within the next 3 years, we would like to see it on all vehicles, and that can make just a huge, it's one of the things on Amy's little donut there, is using the technology we already have. And impaired driving is a key place where we just have not gotten over that last hurdle of saying we want these standard equipment. Again, I saw someone ask for the grant program. Let's make sure to get that out to you so that folks can apply for that. We also at NSC and Road to Zero are hopeful that the House of Representatives will pass this bill before October 31st, which is a deadline. I know there's lots in the news about it, but for us, it's about getting those safety provisions in any kind of infrastructure upgrades that we make across our country. And it really is a once in a generation opportunity. That money is needed not only for our economy, but for helping our country get where it needs to go. And if we can get safety as a primary driver of how things are designed and engineered, it will have huge dividends. So thank you for that. I'm going to end on my last chart here, and that is to bring back we know how to get this done. The color coded that you see there are all the things that are in our pockets today, that if we work together and we work in a collaborative fashion with bringing everything that all of the folks on this call and across the organizations we represent know can help prevent death and injury, we can make a big dent. And so thank you for having us here. Thought I'd give you kind of the bigger brush at the national level, and I'll be along for the questions afterwards. So for that, Philip, back over to you.
Thank you so much for that, Lorraine. Quick reminder to the audience below, please feel free to submit questions for our Q&A session at the end. Or if you have a Vision Zero policy or redesign that you think is successful or you're proud of, let us know in the chat too. Okay, Kyle, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Philip. I do not have slides, so hopefully everybody is able to follow along with my talk here. And as Philip mentioned, I'm with the Active Transportation Alliance. We are essentially the transportation alternatives of the Chicago area. So we do work in both the city and the suburbs. And I'm going to share a little bit of information about kind of the history of Vision Zero in the Chicago area, how it's played out over the last several years, and really some of the struggles that we've had as advocates trying to advance Vision Zero goals. I think overall it has been a disappointing history with Vision Zero in Chicago, and it's hard for me to say that I think it's been the Vision Zero commitment has been helpful in advancing our safety goals as an organization. And that's not necessarily a flaw in the approach, more how it's been implemented here. So Chicago first committed to Vision Zero back in 2012. This is early on in Mayor Rahm Emanuel's first term, where for anybody who's familiar with him knows he tends to be bold and aggressive and want to be out front on things. So he was made Chicago one of the first cities to make this commitment, but there really wasn't any teeth behind the commitment at the time. So the city put it out there and then basically kept doing what it was doing. They started branding some of the roadway projects that they were doing already as Vision Zero projects. But that wasn't because they were part of any coherent or comprehensive plan or strategy. So we were trying to learn more about Vision Zero at the time. I myself attended some of the earlier iterations of this summit, met with and really inspired by Amy and her colleagues within Families for Safe Streets, and trying to figure out how we can advance a more effective Vision Zero strategy in the Chicago area. So we and others started organizing for the city to establish a Vision Zero action plan that would really put down on paper what their goals are, and not just the Vision Zero goal, but the metrics that need to be established to get there, and how they're going to get there, what agencies are going to be involved, and who is going to be responsible for what. So that just wasn't just a DOT initiative, but really wasn't a whole safe systems approach. We were successful in getting the city to develop that plan, which they released in 2016. Overall, it is and still a pretty strong plan in terms of describing the problem. They did some pretty rich data analysis of the traffic crashes and injuries and deaths that happened in the Chicago area, and the plan highlights how a disproportionate amount of those deaths and crashes are happening in majority Black and Brown communities on the south and west sides. For anybody who's familiar with our city, you know that we have pretty extreme segregation and all of the impacts that come with that. And this issue falls right in line with that segregation, where our most unsafe streets are located in the highest need communities, which are majority Black and Brown areas on the south and west side. So I think the plan was successful in making that point clear and sharing that data. And it's still something that we share with and talk with elected officials about as we're talking about safety issues. And then soon after the city developed that action plan, again, thanks to prodding from us and others, they had a Vision Zero framework plan, which dug a little bit deeper and laid out what specifically they could do to redesign streets and upgrade the infrastructure on the high crash corridors that they had identified in the action plan. So the action plan had community areas and corridors, and then the framework plan said, here's a range of possibilities that we could do to improve safety on these streets with new infrastructure. There was unfortunately no funding behind that framework plan, but the idea at the time was that they would seek funding to implement that framework plan. And this is where things, like, I think from our perspective, really fell off the rails in terms of the Vision Zero strategy for the city. So, and a lot of that had to do with the local politics at the time. So around this same time, people may be familiar, Laquan McDonald was tragically shot and killed by Chicago police. Mayor Emanuel, as would come out later, took some deliberate steps to try to bury that video or at least delay its release. People had been in his administration. Ultimately, thanks to some whistleblowers and a hardworking journalist, the video did come out and showed that Laquan McDonald was indeed murdered by Chicago police. And of course, that resulted in a lot of blowback on the mayor and his administration. So his political capital, I would say deservedly, shrunk significantly in this time. So the mayor's office really took a step back from a lot of their initiatives, and Vision Zero, I would put in that group. So not a lot happened on Vision Zero towards the end of the mayor's second term. Again, it was kind of a branding exercise that the DOT was doing, saying that they were addressing traffic safety, but not even implementing the plan that they themselves had developed and released in 2016, at least not implementing it in a way that the public could understand. There's been very little transparency in sharing information in terms of progress on many of the goals and metrics they laid out in that action plan. So then the mayor, somewhat surprisingly, announced that he was not going to run for another term, and we, for the first time in decades, had a wide open mayoral race with nearly a dozen candidates, and really nobody knew who was going to be the next mayor of the city of Chicago. We worked with partner organizations to directly engage mayoral candidates and try to educate them about Vision Zero and other issues we were working on. At the time, we developed a collaborative platform. We established a 501c4 that allowed us to really aggressively question candidates about their positions on these issues and get them on the record. So that whoever is elected, we would have something to follow up with them on and hold them accountable. So Mayor Lori Lightfoot was one of the candidates who was most engaged with us throughout the campaign season. We had several meetings with her policy team, and she gave us a lot of enthusiastic responses on traffic safety and how it relates to racial equity and how things need to change moving forward. So we had some hope at the time after her election that there would be progress on this issue. And unfortunately, it really has been more of the same. It's largely a DOT-led initiative, a branding exercise whereby, they're doing a streetscaping project. They call it a Vision Zero project, but they're not linking it to the Vision Zero action plan. They're not making clear how it's actually designed to prevent traffic crashes and reduce injuries and save lives. We're in the midst of a multi-year capital plan where there's lots of celebration of arterial resurfacing projects and positioning those as safety initiatives while doing very little to actually redesign the arterial and make it safer for people who are walking, biking, riding transit, and people who are in vehicles. So, of course, the city is advancing some safety projects. There are road diets going on. There are pedestrian refuge islands being inserted into some of the more dangerous corridors, but there's no coherent strategy. There's no comprehensive strategy. There's no public reporting or transparency or accountability on these metrics. The city had been meeting regularly with advocates and community leaders about Vision Zero. And those meetings have basically entirely gone away, this happened at the start of the pandemic, and they have not resurfaced in any sort of virtual or in-person form since then. So, that kind of brings us to where we are today. Another couple notes I would mention is from the beginning, there have been really consistent calls from Black and Brown advocates to remove traffic enforcement from Chicago's Vision Zero strategy. Obai Reed, who is the founder of Equiticity, and others have pointed out the harms that come from in-person traffic enforcement by armed police officers. And the city has listened to those calls, but ultimately, not removed enforcement from their Vision Zero strategy. Again, we don't have a lot of evidence that they really are implementing any sort of Vision Zero strategy right now with enforcement or without enforcement. So I don't necessarily think a lot has changed over the last. I'm not saying the problem has necessarily gotten worse because of Vision Zero, but obviously it's a problem, and we have many examples where of horrible, tragic outcomes from interactions between Chicagoans and armed police officers. So that issue really just hasn't been addressed at any sort of satisfactory level by the Vision Zero team and city leaders. More recently, Equiticity and others worked on some research that shows how enforcement is playing out within the biking community. So Bicycling While Black is the name of the study, which demonstrates how bike tickets are being disproportionately issued in Black communities in particular, and police officers have so much as admitted as they're using it as a guise to investigate other potential crimes. So they're stopping somebody for riding on the sidewalk and then looking to check them for something else that might be on their behavior, on their body or in their bicycle. This is clearly unfair and racist enforcement. And I think from the perspective of traffic safety advocates, does nothing to actually prevent crashes and save lives. We don't have any evidence that riding on the sidewalk is an issue not only in these communities or anywhere in the city of Chicago in terms of resulting in serious injury and death. So I think it's just another example how the police department certainly is not at the table for any sort of comprehensive and effective Vision Zero approach. The other thing, as we're talking about enforcement, I think we need to acknowledge Chicago has one of, if not the largest photo enforcement programs in the country. That's both speed and red light cameras. And we are one of the few organizations that have been willing to speak out about the benefits of photo enforcement from a safety perspective. As it is everywhere, it's extremely unpopular in Chicago and in Illinois. It's particularly challenging because in classic Chicago style, there was massive corruption around the initial contract that was issued, whereby there was backroom deals and payoffs being made by the vendor who was originally in charge of the contract. There was a large Chicago Tribune investigation that unearthed all of this. So everybody really didn't like the cameras already. And then they had this Tribune investigation, which demonstrated how corrupt the management of the camera program was. The cameras have stayed in and the city has continued to grow the program. But look, we are familiar with and appreciate the checklist that Lorraine referenced and the slide that Amy had up there. And I think we break up almost all of those rules in terms of how the city manages its program. The clearest example is recently in the mayor's budget. She lowered the ticketing threshold from 10 miles an hour to 6 miles an hour. So she said this was a safety initiative, that speeding is an issue and speeding has increased during the pandemic. So we need to lower the ticketing threshold from 10 miles an hour to 6 miles an hour. Obviously, we agree speeding is a problem and it's gotten worse during the pandemic. We have the data to back that up. It was never clear to us lowering the threshold by 4 miles an hour, how that was clearly a safety goal. And I think, introducing it in the context of the budget cycle when the mayor was dealing with a large budget deficit, and none of the revenue from the ticket program is being used to redesign city streets. I think it's like quite blatantly a revenue generator, which again limits the the effectiveness and the popularity of the program long term. So we have a large photo enforcement program, but I think it's not being managed as effectively as it could be, partially because we still lack a true Vision Zero safe systems approach. Moving forward, I think we obviously are continuing to lobby the mayor and city council on these issues. And from our perspective, I don't think the mayor is, she's certainly not opposed to traffic safety or opposed to many of the things that we want. I think it's more of an issue of political capital and attention. Chicago is facing many challenges right now, as people are familiar. So this just does not rise to the level where her and her team are willing to invest a lot of their time and their resources in addressing it. So a lot of it is left to the DOT, which of course, we know plenty of people within the DOT who are doing good work and trying to advance good projects. But there are many more people who are, taking a very traditional approach, a traditional traffic engineering design approach. Concerns about removing parking, concerns about impact on travel times are really ruling the day and getting in the way of needed safety improvements. So I'm gonna stop there. I wish I had a more inspiring story to tell, but I think it's important to talk about some of the challenges, and especially in a city like Chicago, where we have had our Vision Zero and goal in place for many years, and we just haven't seen the type of progress that we would like to see.
Thank you, Kyle. It's great to hear what's going on in the Chicagoland area. Thank you for that. For those in the audience, feel free to submit questions in the chat below. And now we'll shift back to New York City for our final panelist before our Q&A session with Julia from the New York City DOT. Take it away, Julia.
Great. Thank you very much. Let me just pull this up. Great. Unfortunately, I'm having some PowerPoint difficulties, but I think here as a PDF, it should work fine. Thank you very much. And today I'd like to talk a bit about looking back on not quite a decade, but on 8 years of Vision Zero being official policy in the city of New York. What successes we've seen, what challenges we're still facing, and what we see as kind of the next frontiers for our program. New York City was the first American city to adopt Vision Zero formally, and we've taken a lot of pride in taking this original Swedish approach and with actually engaging in a lot of dialogue with the Swedish traffic administration and making it a little more tailored to our specific New York landscape and specific way of life. So I'll start off by just, oops. There we go. I'll start off by just talking a little bit about our overarching framework. And I think I'm going to have to disagree with the idea that the 3E approach is mutually exclusive with safe systems, because the way we see it and the way that we operate, education, enforcement, and engineering are all part of the safe systems approach, because there are ways in which you find you can kind of mitigate the effects of, quite frankly, being human. We're all human, we're all going to make mistakes. To try to create the perfect human is never going to happen, but the real gist of Vision Zero is that the consequences of those human mistakes shouldn't be fatal. And the way that we reduce, the burden of crashes, the way that we make sure that more lives don't have to be completely turned upside down by them, is by addressing the various problems with our streetscape and with our driving culture from the variety of angles offered by engineering, enforcement, and education. So of course, being from the New York City DOT, where I am the director of safety policy, I can speak mainly about our engineering work. And the bottom line about what Vision Zero has done here is that it's made our current normal as a municipal agency something which produces a level of work that is, really orders of magnitude greater than it used to be. I've got, some of our greatest hits up here on the screen. Won't read them out, but the reason that I've got over X number here is that it's really something that's changing week by week. The levels of street improvement projects for safety that we're doing, the bike lane installations, the upgrades to things like signal systems are progressing at rates which were absolutely unheard of prior to when we decided as a city that it was no longer going to be acceptable for us to have people seriously injured or killed in traffic. A big commitment like that, something that's a very bold thing to say is going to be our philosophy as a city, needed to be matched with similarly bold investments. And to kind of illustrate just how things are different here, when it comes to something like the number of protected bike miles that we've done, before Vision Zero, we were doing about 6.5 miles a year. And some of those years right before Vision Zero were seen as, a really great time for engineering in New York City. But now, if we were doing 6.5 miles, we would be seen as, abjectly failing in our due. Last year, despite a global pandemic that slowed a lot of our work unavoidably because our agency was as affected as anyone else by the pandemic, we still installed nearly 30 miles of protected bike lanes, which is 345% greater than this average from the years right before. And even still there, we have people urging us that we could do even more. So this is our new normal, really. And it's something that, it's going to be, even as we move into a new administration, nobody actually thinks it's ever going to go down. It's kind of recalibrated what we see as our duty as an agency that builds. Similarly, we have interventions now for safety, which were not part of the common vocabulary prior to Vision Zero. The leading pedestrian interval, which is a really simple, really straightforward intervention where pedestrians get a walk signal about 7 seconds prior to parallel vehicular traffic getting a green light, therefore, making them more visible, preventing a lot of the failure to yield crashes. This was something we'd had in our toolkit prior to Vision Zero, but we just weren't really using it very much. Now we're doing hundreds and hundreds of these every year. We're trying to get them in pretty much every priority corridor we've got across the city. And it's something that we, evangelize almost across the country and across the world, that it's something incredibly cost effective, simple, and straightforward that you can do for safety. And this is what we see as part of our a goal here, really, as a city agency. And the result, I think, is that as you see things become more typical on our streets, as you just get used to them, what the ideas that used to be seen as so controversial are no longer a problem at all. I'm thinking on the left here, you've got an article from 2011 about the two-way protected bike lane DOT installed on Prospect Park West in New York City. And this was massively controversial. We had a lawsuit that dragged on for years and years and years. But eventually that lawsuit died and the bike lane was here to stay, and we didn't back down on it. And as you can see on the right, we now had 1 month in which over 75,000 cyclists used this bike lane that, a decade earlier naysayers were saying was, the worst possible thing, destroying the neighborhood. We've normalized what used to be controversial. And yes, we still do get lawsuits all the time. This is New York City after all, but we're winning them. And that's the important thing. So, I mean, a lot of people are looking for, what is the magic bullet to reduce injuries and deaths. Unfortunately, we do not have one. If we did, we'd be in a much different situation. But I do tell people that probably our most important tool is speed management. And you've probably heard this a lot, but just that small difference in speed can really make a tremendous difference in survivability of a pedestrian crash. At the very start of Vision Zero, we lowered the citywide speed limit from 30 miles per hour to 25 miles per hour on nearly every street. Then we also began our speed camera program and began it at just a few locations in 2014, then massively expanded it under state law in 2019. Sorry, Chicago, I love you, but we are definitely the biggest automated enforcement program in the country, if not the world. We're not too sure about some cities in China, but we now have a state law that allows us to have cameras in 750 school zones. It does not cap how many cameras we can have within those zones. So right now we're at about 1,650, and we're hoping by middle of next year to end at 2,220 cameras. The ticket is $50, no points on your license, as Amy talked about. It captures the plate of any vehicle that's going 10 miles per hour or more over the limit during pretty much, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. weekdays year round. This was an expansion of hours that happened in 2019. Previously, we could only have them on streets that were adjacent to a school building and from an hour before to an hour after school activities. But these cameras were so effective in lowering speeds and preventing serious crashes that we were able to build political will for an expansion. So yes, our state government, about 250 miles away, is what gives New York City the authority to run a camera program, but we're hoping that that will change and we can have a bit more home rule in that regard so that we can continue using these tools really to the great best of their capacities. Having the largest speed camera program in the world and kind of gave us a duty to really follow the data and report on it and show how effective it could be. We did see drops in injuries for all modes. And what's more surprisingly, we saw that the cameras, other than the initial complaints you get about, oh, this is a tax on drivers, et cetera, were really widely accepted. And I think one really good measure of this is the fact that when people get speed camera tickets, they're by and large accepting them, paying them, moving on and learning. 98%, everybody has the right to request a hearing to challenge their ticket. Barely anybody does. And of the small number of people who do, most of them are overturned. 19 out of 20 of them most of them are upheld. Very few of them are overturned. 95% of them are upheld. It's a $50 ticket. That means that over the course of the 7 years that we have data for the program, something like just under 50% have only gotten one, and the majority have gotten no more than 2. And this is out of 7 years of data that we have. So we're really very impressed. However, we do have this hardcore of people who are getting 10 plus tickets. And we think that the next real quest for us in our state legislative agenda is to get some form of escalating sanctions for repeat offenders. This would be, as is currently proposed in one bill up in Albany, it would be an increase of about $50 each time, up to about $300 to $350, and then the suspension of the registration of the vehicle. Something to just acknowledge that yes, a $50 ticket is usually all it takes for most drivers, but for those who it doesn't, we do need something a little bit stronger. We also want to be able to get authority from the state to run these 24/7, because as we've unfortunately seen, we know that something like it was actually 30% of all deaths in 2020 happened in school speed zones where cameras were installed, but at times when the state law was prohibiting their operations, which is overnight and on weekends. And then as you can see here, of all those fatal crashes that occurred in speed zones with cameras, more than half of them were at times when the cameras had to be turned off. So we know that there's still an opportunity for us to be able to save even more lives and prevent even more injuries if we had more control over this program. And then here I just want to kind of show the Hall of Fame for our arterial roads that have speed cameras. These gigantic declines, which are greater than the average of about 72% drops in speeding on places where the cameras are installed. These are some, very notorious corridors. For those not familiar with New York, all of these are very wide, very long, and have had notorious speeding problems in the past. But during that 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. block, this is how much we've been able to reduce speeding just using our cameras. And when I see numbers like this, it's all the more mind-boggling that there's so many places in the United States where automated enforcement just isn't allowed. But I want to caveat all this with the fact that we really do believe we still need some level of human enforcement in Vision Zero, and that's simply because coming from the point of view of a Department of Transportation, there are so many factors in crashes, and I read every single report of fatalities that comes out from in the aftermath of a fatal crash, and there are so many crashes we're seeing now where we couldn't use automated enforcement to address the problem, or we couldn't design it out. And these, I think most importantly, somebody did mention this in the chat box, first and foremost is DWI. We don't have any kind of automated system there. And for things like ignition interlocks, those are being installed by courts only after people are already convicted of DWI. Also, courts often order interlocks, but if the offender doesn't own a car and they were driving someone else's car, or their cars were wrecked or confiscated at the time of address, we can't really touch them. And of course, we would love to say that if you just automatically had like an ignition interlock system in every car that comes for sale, that would help definitely. But unfortunately, as a city Department of Transportation, we can't do something like that, which would be more of a federal level. So while we definitely can advocate for federal solutions, and we're really heartened by how Vision Zero is getting attention in federal legislation, there are still places where there's no substitute for actually having a human being out there. Similarly, this year we've seen really problems with a lot of unlicensed drivers, suspended drivers. There's nothing stopping them getting back behind the wheel. And it's incredibly frustrating to read the report of, this is a human being who died because someone did not listen to an order from the court that they shouldn't be behind the wheel. And it's very difficult to take that, knowing that we can design, the best roadway in the world, the most forgiving system. But if you have one person who, is out there for some reason, who has no business driving, they can kill themselves or they can still kill other people. We're seeing that a lot this year in the rise of motorcyclist fatalities. A lot of them are people who, they don't have the license, they don't have the registration, and unfortunately they're killing themselves. So, as much as automated enforcement can do lots, and we really love it, and we want to explore whether we can automate things like bike lane enforcement, there's still a role for humans in it. Looking then, of course, the bottom line, when we say Vision Zero, it's all about numbers in the first place. And unfortunately, we have not been immune to the trend that's affecting the rest of the United States since the pandemic began. We were able to buck the trend that the rest of the US was seeing for several years. But then 2019 and 2020 were very challenging to us. What's happening essentially? I'd say it's the motor vehicle occupants and the motorcyclist numbers, which are really becoming quite worrisome to us. We know it's not a lack of engineering work because our engineering work has been cumulative over 8 years, and it didn't stop with the pandemic. None of our engineering went away, but we're still seeing a lot of people just speeding too much, driving recklessly, killing themselves or other people. Although, we do look at Sweden as an example, and we found that they also saw a plateau in their fatality decreases after about 7 years. So that kind of led them to kind of reevaluating what's working best, what's not. And I think we're going to be doing a lot of that as one administration ends and the next one begins. And overall, our trajectory was still much better than it would have been. Of course, we want to see zero overall, but when we look at the years prior to Vision Zero beginning versus now, we know that every life saved has been, it's been someone's world, and that's nothing to take lightly. We have also, though, had a very striking decrease in our pedestrian fatalities, and this is notable because, of course, pedestrians are the most vulnerable of all road users. We've seen a 39% decline if you look at 2020 versus, the 5-year average before Vision Zero. Sorry, one second. Yep. 2020, I mean, of course, kind of lost in the overall increase in fatalities was the fact that this was the first year in New York City history when fewer than 100 pedestrians died. We've been keeping records since 1910. That had never happened. We had never gone below 100. And then in 2020, 96 pedestrians died. Of course, there were differences in how many pedestrians were out in the first place because of the pandemic. And our next challenge is to, sustain these kind of drops as life gets back to more of what we think of as normal. Sorry. So what are our continuing challenges? And we do have a lot of them, as those past two slides have shown. Of course, this year our numbers are not where we want them to be. The entire country is seeing those increases, and unfortunately we've not been an exception. I touched upon earlier that there are problems for which there's no design fix, and I think we are currently facing a somewhat record number of motorcyclist deaths, and it's really kind of striking. I think only about 25% of last year's motorcyclist deaths were appropriately licensed. We had a lot of young men who, possibly because of the pandemic and the economic situation, were bored and thrill-seeking and had wide open roads to speed on. So only 25% of them were properly licensed. Only about 30% were properly registered. So we had a lot of stolen motorcycles. This is a very difficult population to reach. It's a very difficult population to design for because they're risk takers by their nature. And I think this is something that we need to do a whole lot more research into and look to the examples set by other countries, because it's an ongoing problem that's not going away. Kind of on a similar note, the New York City of 2021 looks a lot different from the New York City of 2014. We have a whole bunch of micromobility devices that didn't exist, like e-scooters. We have an economic landscape where apps incentivize delivery workers having to really punish themselves and go as quickly as possible in order to scrape a living by. We have legalized cannabis, or impending legalizations of cannabis all across the country, and the evidence we're seeing from states where it already has been legal is just showing it's going to be very difficult to kind of treat driving while stoned the way that we treat driving while intoxicated by alcohol, because of the ways of measuring whether someone is acutely intoxicated are so different. So we're looking at a future that's a lot more complex, but I think that because we've been able to normalize so much of our engineering work and just kind of get to the point where Vision Zero is something people recognize, something that people support, we've already made a great deal of progress there. And then finally, I'll take it towards, kind of what's our next frontier here. And I've talked about it a bit, but really there are right now, we've come to realize, and I've come to realize through my career here at New York City DOT, that there's so much beyond city control that we can try our best to influence, but otherwise we're going to have to wait for the culture in our state and the culture federally to change too. We talk about a safe system, but whose system is it? I mean, New York City doesn't exist in a bubble. We operate in the framework of local, state, and federal laws, and we can change our city's culture, but we're not impervious to what's happening in the rest of the country. For example, vehicle design. We as a city cannot, slam shut the bridges and tunnels and say, we're only allowing vehicles with these kind of safety standards to operate on our streets. We'd be in violation of all kinds of interstate commerce laws. So I try to take a lesson from Sweden here in that their European new car assessment program, the star ratings on vehicles, was largely responsible for the adoption of safe vehicle technology. If the star score is based on whether you have a pedestrian protection system, then manufacturers are going to make sure you have that in there. So we're really heartened by the fact that NHTSA is going to be working to revise the new car assessment program to take vulnerable road users into account. And then finally, I'm reminded of what a speaker from the Swedish Traffic Administration told me, which is road safety is not just a government or municipal issue. It's naive to think that one organization alone can solve an issue that's just so multidisciplinary and it occupies so many different frames of our lives. So we should approach road safety the way we approach other complex social problems. And that does acknowledge that the private sector does have a role to play here. Is alongside, the public sector is really the steward of Vision Zero, is the owner of the roads. So for example, one example I just saw this week was that Tesla was is planning to do a version in Texas of what companies like Allstate and Progressive already do, where if you're a safe driver through telematics systems, the lower how much you pay. Tesla is actually going a little bit further and saying they're not going to count age, gender, or any of those usual things toward determining your rates. It's solely going to be built-in systems within the vehicle that look at hard braking and accelerating and use, the safety score to kind of generate the insurance that they offer. So this is, of course, we're not going to pretend the private sector is full of saintly angelic actors, but it's an example of how maybe in the next 10 years, we'll see a bit more of the influence of the private sector along with the traditional public and third sector. So I know time's coming to an end. There is so much to talk about from 8 years of Vision Zero, can't finish all in here, but I would urge people to go to our website here, kind of long if you want to screenshot it. It has all kinds of reports, maps, guidance documents to just explain a bit more about what we've done and how we've done it and why. So with that, I thank you for your time today, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Julia. I'll pivot over to questions and have a discussion here. I know we're supposed to wrap up at 2. If for those who can stay extra, we'll extend this till a few extra minutes past 2 o'clock. But for our panelists, if you keep the answers shorter, if that's possible. Amy, I'll pivot to you first because it's so pervasive and dangerous. We've talked a lot about curbing speeding today. Mothers Against Drunk Driving successfully changed Americans' perception of drunk driving, but the same hasn't been done about speeding, even though it's cited as the #1 reason for crashes for years. Why do you think that's so, and what's your experience been like on this issue?
Let me just put it in context. People do still think it's okay to speed. After losing my son, I will share, I've still had friends and family members, some of whom I don't talk to as much anymore, who will joke about having a lead foot. That's how pervasive the problem is. So we're not going to change that problem overnight. And I think what MAD did is really a lot of what we're trying to do, give a face to the crisis, put a face to the numbers, and really shift that cultural conversation. And I think we are having success around that. In New York, there is a little bit more. There's a widespread recognition and acceptance of the speed grammars, and we didn't have the pushback and the kinds of things that you see in Chicago. That said, we still have our work cut out for us. So it is really about looking at those systematic solutions, redesigning roads, and things like TA's innovative 25 by 25 campaign to really change the culture around speeding in ways besides just enforcement. It really needs a multifaceted approach. And I think it is something you saw that MAD did. It's really about looking at consequences for drivers after they kill somebody and they were excessively speeding. We tried to pass a bill in Albany that would make it a criminal misdemeanor sanctioned by a fine of $750 and possibly 30 days in jail for killing somebody with your car while excessively speeding or engaging in other dangerous driving behaviors. And it passed the Senate, and it didn't even come to the floor for a vote in the Assembly. It never made it out of the Transportation Committee. So we have our work cut out for us.
Great, thank you so much for that. Safe systems is a topic that we've heard about here. It's a topic that we're hearing more and more in the Vision Zero space. Several of our speakers mentioned it here. For those not familiar with it, it's the goal of safe systems is an approach to design and to operate our vehicles and streets in a manner that anticipates human error with the goal of reducing fatal and serious injuries. So it focuses more on integrating humans that we all know that we make mistakes rather than concentrating on individual responsibility. So Lorraine, Julia, I was curious if you could dive in more about how safe systems might affect our space. How will that affect how Vision Zero looks like 10 years from now? Should it? Does it put less emphasis on any of those pillars if this continues to grow?
Well, maybe I'll start and then kick it over to Julia. We talked, several folks have said that, for years we've looked at enforcement, education, and engineering, and those, are ways that we got to today. But looking at safe systems says we really have to look at, the entire equation of what it means to be on a roadway, what the roadway is, who's on the roadway, and what we can do to design in the things that can mistake-proof the environment. We know that there are places around the world, and I think some of them were mentioned in Norway, where they got 0 pedestrians for a year down, and bicycle fatalities, and Brazil as well, looking at the lowest number of deaths by thinking about things from a safe system perspective. You know, they're going to have their tough days too, I'm sure, when things, as Julie said, kind of will plateau on them. But there's lots of great examples for us to start to look at this as in just a much more not only holistic, but non-blame oriented approach, like we've done in other industries, like air travel. I mean, you know, we've got air travel down in its safety records by, I think it is 95% over some period of time. And that's not because we said, let's just make sure the pilots are better, right? It's we looked at everything, the redundancy, the scheduling, you know, the entire system, so that we could get it to where we, you know, where we feel much safer and are much safer. So Julia probably knows much better than I, so I'm going to kick it over to her.
Well, one thing that I think is going to become, well, I'm hoping, I may have rose-colored glasses on here, but what I'm hoping is that emphasizing the safe systems approach more is going to reduce, if not put an end to, kind of the more, you know, finger-wagging pedestrians, you should do this type messaging that I often see in other parts of the country, and that, you know, all of us in our, you know, everyday lives will find people also who are saying, you know, what's that, you know, people crossing the street looking at their phones or with their headphones in, et cetera. I think when we continue to communicate more that at the heart of safe systems is the fact that to be human is to err, and we need to create systems around human errors, is that, you know, we'll stop trying to emphasize the idea that pedestrians should be these perfect, you know, paragons of following every law while we make exceptions for drivers. I think it'll, when you go more toward a system rather than an individual, I think people will be able to concentrate on what matters more.
Great, thank you, Julia. Kyle, I wanted to lean in a bit on your experience, especially as Director of Public Affairs. When speaking with the media or elected officials, how much has how we are talking about crashes changed in your experience, especially in a city with Vision Zero that is just a few years old? A lot has been said about, you know, the Crashes Not Accidents campaign. Has that been effective in Chicago? And how do you imagine that how we talk about crashes changes in the coming years?
Yeah, I think the media is one area where we have seen progress in Chicago. You know, not universal progress, of course. You know, the crash report comes across on a wire service, and it still uses the term accident. But we have seen plenty of in-depth reporting after crashes, especially pedestrian and bicycle crashes, that you know, looks at the infrastructure and the location of the crash, and looks to organizations like ours and others who can highlight, you know, how the infrastructure may have contributed to the crash, if not caused the crash altogether. So you know, again, it's not every reporter, it's not every outlet, but I think there is a lot of quality coverage of this issue, but certainly better than it was several years ago. And we have an alderman right now who's pushing a crash not accident ordinance in terms of changing how it's referenced in the city code, which I think is demonstrating there is kind of some public recognition and awareness, at least higher than there was several years ago, about what contributes to serious and fatal crashes.
Great, thank you for that. Just one last final question, just very quickly. We can go around if you have something to say, but I'm getting the signal that we should start wrapping up. Thanks, especially to our panelists for staying a few extra minutes. Curious, just to end on a positive note here, what's the Vision Zero street safety policy, street redesign, or program that another city or maybe state or another country has implemented and seems exciting and promising?
I want to give a shout out to London to really having quite an amazing Vision Zero project. I was they're kind of advising a bit when they launched it a few years ago. And what I told them was like, you are starting at a level that's just so much ahead of where we were in 2014. And they've done things like ban large trucks that have poor direct visibility from their city center. That's something that, you know, we would love to do in New York. Trust me, we've talked about that. But unfortunately, again, like I was saying in my presentation, there are things we cannot unilaterally do as a city. We would be falling foul of all kinds of federal laws there. But just the fact that they decided, you know, this is the problem, here's the data, and here is how, and they set up a whole program to come up with visibility ratings and help people, you know, procure the vehicles that had the best direct vision. I thought that was wonderful. We're doing, you know, we're doing a lot of work here with our procurement in New York City, trying to use our buying power if we can't use our legal power. Our Department of Citywide Administrative Services is procuring high visibility vehicles in the hopes that, you know, if we demand it as standard, we can kind of change what's out there. And I know Keith Kerman will be doing a panel tomorrow on that. Also, London's got this series of what they call bike superhighways, which work really well on their kind of winding, less grid-like streets. But when I rode them, just you have a whole other feeling of you are one of a community of cyclists because, you know, you built it, people came, and now they're all around you, and you're like a force to be reckoned with. So if you ever get a chance to go to London and ride on these bike superhighways, it's really, you know, kind of something that you see like, wow, this is just game changer.
At the risk of patting Julia and the advocates that helped make it happen on the, I think we, you know, we continue to be inspired by some of the engineering and redesign that's going on in New York City. For us, it's not any particularly innovative or magical infrastructure solution. It's things we're very familiar with, like road diets and bike lane networks and bus lane networks. And I think New York has made really measurable progress and increased the rate at which that infrastructure is going in over the last several years. Whereas Chicago has gone in the opposite direction. We've seen fewer PBLs, very little bus network work happening, and, you know, 1 or 2 road diets every couple of years. And we know at that rate, we're just not going to be able to make the type of incremental progress that even New York has seen pre-pandemic. So.
Well, great. Unless there's anyone else who wants to comment, I think that's all the time we have for today. But thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. Thank you for staying a few extra minutes. And to everyone else, thanks for joining us and have a great afternoon.
Bye all. Thank you.